Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're actually pretty excited to be here to share with you the research that our nonprofit has been doing. This is a 501(c) educational nonprofit. As you can see here, I'm the old guy in the organization. All my colleagues are individuals like Samantha, who we met when she was 14 years old at her high school in South Central LA. I'm in Los Angeles. I reached out to the high school to adopt the high school to try to create new curriculum. This was years ago. Those students went from 14-year-olds to 20, 21-year-olds. And it was kind of an interesting story because essentially what happened was it was during COVID, and Marco, who's the co-founder, he and I discussed the fact that everyone during COVID was AWOL, like they weren't showing up for class in South Central Los Angeles and other communities. And we said, well, why don't we try to do a group Zoom session just to keep people on track with their education and kind of do what I had been doing previously with their high school years before. And we did this program where Samantha and others joined in, and we talked about 3D printing and robotics and AI and spatial web, we were calling it before. This was before Zuckerberg changed his name from Facebook to Meta. So the goal was to get people exposed to this emerging tech so they got passionate about their education, got into some career. And because all the meetings that I was having with executive teams of large companies around virtual reality was all on Zoom because it was COVID, so I wasn't traveling all over the world to have these meetings. I had Sam and the rest of the team sign NDAs, and they shadowed me and just listened to these projects that I was doing with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So they got to hear firsthand how I was having a dialogue with an executive in a business about this emerging capability around VR. Now, the only reason I was talking to them about VR is because there was an inflection point where it was finally affordable and it worked well. And I thought corporates could start to actually use it, mainly because the Oculus Quest had finally come out. And Sam and the team would be on these calls and in these discussions, and then I realized they were as good, if not better, at thinking through how to use virtual reality to create environments for businesses, whether the business was trying to do training. What do we have? One, maybe you want to tell, like Blend Hub is an example of a company we worked with. What was Blend Hub doing then?
They were doing localized food production. So they were trying to create an ecosystem where food doesn't have to be processed in different parts of the world. It would be all just made in one area specifically. And what their big idea was having the factory next to the farm. Instead of having them ship food to factories, they would have it right there next to each other. Easy shipment, less cost as well. And their goal is just to feed more people.
And their business need was COVID happened, so they could not take investors to Mexico or to India to see their factories next to farms, some of their use cases. So they said, could you maybe help us build a virtual simulation of our factories so we could take investors into the factories without having to fly them to Mexico, which we can't anyways because of COVID. So that's the project they were hiring me to do for them. And I brought Sam into that project and paid Sam as a professional to help me with that project. She's an art major, so it wasn't even a technical coding expertise that she needed because the software, if you're not familiar with some of the software in VR now, platforms like Engage and Spatial and these other, they're like 3D PowerPoint versions. All of a sudden, like a few years ago, you'd have to get a very technical team. It could cost you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a virtual reality environment. Now you can do it on free software, like you designed PowerPoint, the skill set. So what we started to realize was Sam and others were getting paid to do the projects with these companies. The market was starting to wake up. They wanted to do stuff. There just aren't any resources to actually help them. So we're like, this is the ticket for a low-income community to start getting jobs, professionally paid jobs quickly, and to kind of leapfrog themselves into the new job economy emerging on this. And we had one colleague of ours, Juan, who was at, you want me to tell the story of Juan, kind of his story with when he was working at Target stores and what happened to him?
So in 2020, when we started doing all these Zoom calls and just getting online, Juan was actually working at Target as just a stocking worker, and he would just work, come to the calls, and go to school at the same time. So he was pretty busy, but after he did the whole Zoom calls or Zoom universities that we were calling at the time, he started getting the skills, and that's when we were doing the shadowing of the companies, and he was particularly on this billion-dollar cosmetic company, what would we say? And they were really interested in continuing after the pilot to continue working with um, the spatial web at the time, but metaverse, and trying to continue building use cases for their company. And they actually asked Marcus, they said if he would work for them because they wanted to continue so badly. But Marcus was busy mentoring us. He had his other job at the time as well. So Marcus offered, why don't we hire Juan instead? So they were like, no, we wouldn't want to take him from your organization. But Marcus emphasized that was the whole point.
Like, please steal him from me. Employ him.
Yes.
So Juan was working at Target stores. And a year later, he was leading the VR department for a cosmetic company that was over $1 billion. He has that on his, like it was a legitimate job. He was making a professional salary. Like, that's what's happening out there right now. You know, the demand is growing. There's not a lot of resources. If you can get plugged in at the right time, you can get employed. So when we saw this happening, Marco and I said, let's create a nonprofit. Let's create a nonprofit and start, well, I'll take that back. First, we just started doing tons of projects. We did like over 30 commercial projects, and we had like Sam, and we had like 12 people from South Central LA that were being employed, and their skill sets, like Sam's, are probably some of the more effective and efficient designers in VR in the planet right now, right? I mean, so they were learning a really valuable skill set, and we just started to employ people. And then I thought about it, was like, you know what, this is a great model. However, you know, I was an executive at Bain and Deloitte Consulting, and I know that the consulting industries were going to get into this full force. Accenture's already bought like 50,000 headsets for their employees. So I knew we'd be competing with those consultant firms eventually. There's a window of opportunity where we could dominate, and we were. Mark, when I talked about it, I said, you know what would be an industry that you will always be the de facto expert? You, meaning an individual, a young person from a low-income community with the skill sets of VR, you will always be the expert if the client base is a school in your community. Accenture or Deloitte, no one can compete with you, because if you have the VR skills, you have the domain expertise too, because you came from that high school. So we created a nonprofit, and we pivoted to focus specifically on public schools in low-income communities to go consult and advise them as a nonprofit model. And our model was, we would train individuals from low-income communities. Once they got a proficient skill set, we said, great, we're going to employ you now to go help your school you graduated from 2 years ago. Because the best way to help a school understand the power of using I call it immersive and experiential edutainment-based methods of learning. Immersive and experiential edutainment-based methods of learning. That's what you're bringing to a school. And the technology had gotten to a point where the software to design these curriculums, to design these, was something the students and teachers could do. So you can make a public school that has limited funds self-sufficient, because the school now could use a $300 headset, $400 now, right, because they raised their price, software that was essentially free, 3D versions of PowerPoint. And we had a whole methodology. We'd go to the school, and the way it worked was we'd raise money from a donor. Verizon Education gave us the money for our first school in Broward County, Florida. A private individual and a company called Mesmerize gave us funding to do Chicago and Los Angeles. And essentially what we would do is we'd approach a school. We'd say to the principal, we want to do a project with you to experiment with using VR in your classroom to allow you to create new educational pedagogies around learning in immersive and experiential ways. And they said, what does that mean? We said, listen, or they said, I love it, I kind of get it, but let's go talk to the superintendent, let's get this approved. I said, no. I would rather ask for forgiveness than permission. As a principal, if you want to be a pioneer, we're going to bring 30 headsets down to your school. Students that graduated from a similar low-income school from South Central are going to come meet your students and teachers. And then collectively, with 30 or 40 of your students, administrators, principal, and teachers, we're going to do an experiment over the next 5 months. We're going to work with you. And we're going to fund this through some private donors that are going to fund it. And the question is, we're going to take topics or subjects that you're teaching and see if we can get the results from, I don't know if you guys have seen the PwC study. Let me fast forward to it. This is going to be painful because I'm going to click rapidly. There's Juan, and yeah, she said, yeah, okay, all that stuff happened. I want to hear, okay. I don't know, this is the study we saw when we were like, we got to do this, okay? PwC did this study in 2020 where they compared a group of virtual reality trained and learners to a group of classroom learners and a group of online learners, 3 cohorts. And they just wanted to do an efficacy study to see what was the value of VR learning versus traditional methods of online or classroom. VR learners were 4 times faster to train than the classroom learners. VR learners said they were 275% had an improved confidence to act on what they learned. They were 3.75 times more emotionally connected to it, and they were 4 times more focused than their e-learning peers. If you're a teacher in a public school system and you can get a 10% improvement on your effectiveness of teaching, that's a big deal. These are exponential leaps. And this is using 2020 study, which meant they used to do this research, PwC used 2019 technology. As all of you know, 2022 headsets and software are cheaper and exponentially better than what was used in 2019. So these numbers should even be more effective. So our goal was, let's see if we can help a public school system reach this type of goal. So back to the methodology. We'd go into the school and we'd ask the principal and the students and the teachers, mostly the teachers and the principal, what is a topic you're teaching in your school that you're failing at teaching in your public school? Meaning the grades of your students on subject A are well below state averages every year. You're failing teaching this subject. Let's play with the lowest common denominator. That's the topic we're going to see if we can create immersive and experiential methods to teach that same topic to get anything close to these results. That was the premise. And maybe we'll fail, but let's experiment because the study's out and there's something magical happening. Let's see if we can apply it here. And so we'd go to the school and we would ask that question to you. Now, the thing that was interesting, maybe you can share like what the Chicago teacher said when we proposed that.
Oh, yeah. So when we went to Chicago, we were expecting like an academic subject like math or science, but...
And by the way, the Chicago teacher said, there's lots of subjects we're failing at.
Yes.
He said, SAT prep scores for college test scores, or math or science.
Yeah, but they kind of threw a curveball at us, and they told us a story about a student who had recently been shot and killed by gun violence recently, which was a continuous trend for them. So he actually wanted to kind of hit on that topic, and we were a little concerned just because it is a very heavy topic, but eventually we decided to do social and emotional learning around urban trauma as their topic. And we created so many environments just trying to figure out how students can express grief, express their creativity, let out those emotions that they can't really let out in school just because it is hard. Like I've experienced something similar, so I understand, but yeah, we were really interested in it. But we did have some trouble trying to see what approach to take just because the topic was very different.
But pretty extraordinary, right? The principal says, I was going to pick math or science, but the reality is we just had our third the school season's just started and we just had our 3rd gun violence death. And if you want to know what's limiting our learning, it's everyone's in shock in our school. This was the last kid to get killed was a friend of ours. Like he was very popular in the school. He got shot. So can you help us with that? That's what we're struggling with. And I knew, I reached out to Skip Izzo, who is the professor at University of Southern California, who's doing all the PTSD work with veterans and more. I had Skip do a call with the Chicago teachers and teams and share with us his research. And that's the subject we chose. And so what we do is we take a 3-month period, we divide the teachers and students, the 30 of them, once we give them all headsets, we divide them into teams, and then we have this fun competition where they all take the same topic and they compete against each other. Now, why are we doing that? Because we're trying to run multiple experiments on the same topic, because we know each experiment, each team, will create environments with a lot of really bad ideas and a few good ideas. But across 5 teams on the same topic, we can eliminate all the not so cool ideas, take all the good ideas, and take them all and make one collective experience that becomes an asset they can use. Do you see how that method works? Okay, team, if you were all the class with teachers and students, we would divide you up. We say over the next 3 months, we've created 5 teams out of all of you. We're having a fun competition, so make it fun. And Samantha will be the team lead for your team, and Juan will be the team lead for your team, and Marco will be the team lead for your team. So they have the expertise to get you trained in how to create in these environments. And what we're going to see happen is in about 2 months after you build your experiences, whatever you want to do, we're going to go through them all as a group, and we're going to see stuff that worked and didn't work. And then we're going to all collaborate together to take all the winning ideas and put them into one asset that deals with social and emotional learning, dealing with urban trauma. So when we did that experiment, one team came up with, hey, let's take the 5 stages of grief and create a virtual reality experience where you have to walk through and you actually go into the depression or the anger, and we'll have wind and we'll have smoke and we'll have like grayscale colors and we'll have, gloomy sky. You can do so much in VR, right, to build that emotion. And so we said, okay, 5 stages of grief. That's a great idea. Let's use that idea. Another group said, what we want to do is we want to create a museum for our high school in virtual reality where we memorize the people that we lost, the gun violence, and the artwork we're going to show into this environment is going to be all the way that we as a community express our grief when someone gets shot and killed. We get tattoos and we have graffiti that memorize people. And in the art class in the high school, we actually have students do an art project around it. So let's take a LiDAR, let's take our phone and use the LiDAR, the scanning mechanisms of the new phone. Let's LiDAR the graffiti off the cement. Let's LiDAR the tattoos off of people. Let's get those scanned images and then make them like displays in a museum in the Michelle Clark Public High School Memorial Museum. And when students are in there, they can actually put digital flowers, they can reflect, they can put sticky notes and share their thoughts. I mean, again, they're ideas. We weren't afraid to fail. They could be good ideas or bad ideas. That's a great idea, though, isn't it? It's a very interesting idea. And that memorial could grow over time. So the method, we would do that, and we do 2 topics. I mean, some of the other topics that some of the schools, why don't you share, like the Florida school, what their topic was?
Yes, so Broward County, Florida, that's the first project we ever did. They wanted to do healthy living on a budget as their first subject.
By the way, the reason they wanted to do that rather than math or science is because they have an obesity problem. They said, if you want to know what's affecting us that we can't get kids to learn, is a lot of people because of low income are eating fast food, and they're becoming lethargic in class, and they're becoming overweight, and then we have a healthcare epidemic. And we get nurses or doctors or fitness people to come in to talk to the kids, and they want nothing to do with it. I mean, they're just not paying attention to it. Can you create an environment that makes it really interesting to learn about healthy living on a budget? That's what we experimented with.
Yeah, and then their second subject was financial literacy, which is kind of funny because referring to this study, that's actually how I learned how to do my taxes, because that was our experience that we created. So while creating it, I was learning and kind of going through the motions as well. So now I know how to do taxes because of it. But then with Los Angeles, our most recent project, we did support for first-generation college students as our topic, and those have been the ones so far. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share with you kind of the net of what I think was really interesting. We came up with, there's the method we used where we split them up into teams, and this was literally like the project plan for the way we'd interact with the school over the 8 to 12 weeks. I'll share with you what I think the most powerful thing was, which I think is what our nonprofit is delivering, where we're delivering impact, is I think we figured out a good educational pedagogy for how would you use VR in a classroom. The most effective way, I mean, sure, you could get students in a classroom and give them a VR headset and they sit in it to learn about world history through some app that some big company probably built, because there's tons of apps on the App Store and there's some great things out there. You can go through Anne Frank's house, for example. I don't know if you guys have seen that app. So there's great educational experiences. The most effective one that we found was a scenario where a teacher, and by the way, the teachers we were working with were very non-technical. They were a little bit scared of VR. It's not like something they were gravitating towards. The students did, but the teachers were a little bit skeptical, meaning they just was dealing with tech and they weren't very technical. But what we did was there was an educational pedagogy called creative learning assignment. The way that worked was like this. If I'm a teacher and you're my class and you all have VR headsets and I spent some time training you, and by the way, you don't have to spend much time teaching young people, training them this stuff. Once they get in it, they kind of learn on their own. Just like they learn, it's about as complicated as posting a TikTok video to create these environments at this point. But if I'm the teacher and you're the students, and I want to give you an assignment, like I'm sure you've all remembered grade school, regardless of the country, the concept of a book report where the teacher says, here's a topic, go research it, write up what you learned in some format, and then get up in front of class and read to the rest of the class, 5 weeks from now, your book report, what you learned about this topic. And half the class will be falling asleep while one student is presenting what they learned. And I, as the student, will forget it the moment I get done with that assignment, because it was a very passive way for me just to write out what I learned. We all did that in school, right? We had these, what do you call it, like a research paper or something. That's the same thing. However, what we designed with them was this notion where the teacher says, okay, students, remember, me as a teacher, I don't have to be technical to do this. I'm just giving the instruction. All of you, get in small teams of 2 to 3. You're all going to take a topic that I want you to learn about, go research it, go to the library, go on the internet, traditional ways of research. But the way you're going to present your results of what you learned to me, the teacher, and to the rest of your class is you are going to go into VR and build a story and an environment around what you learned. And on 8 weeks from now, all of you are going to have all the other classmates come into your environment in the headsets, and you're going to give them a tour of what you learned. Okay? From that method, what we found out is this. Even if I, as a student, was not that good at creating a virtual reality environment, it didn't matter. The fact that I was asked to go in and use my spatial memory to place objects and create things, I learned it. Even if I didn't want to learn it, I learned it. Because I had to experience it, I actually had to build it in there. And I had fun with it because I got to tell a story and I got to use special effects and all this stuff. So students were telling us, that's what Sam's referring to. We did a project for a client, a brokerage firm or something. We did a client project and it was about going to a bank to get a loan or taxes and stuff. And all the young people on my team were like, I didn't know anything about that subject, but the fact that I had to build that space for a client, I don't think I'll ever forget that subject. Because you have spatial memory, it's like where things are located. And then the teacher, if I gave you all that assignment, even if all of you created something that was a throwaway, meaning it was, it would only serve the purpose of you learning it. The reality is one of your teams probably does an exceptional job, and I as a teacher now, I have an asset that I can copy and paste and give to other teachers, or even ameliorate the design of that asset with the next class. Meaning I as a teacher start to see this pathway to developing new curriculum by just crowdsourcing my own class and trying to find that genius in the class, creative genius and technical genius, that creates some asset for me. And that's where teachers started to get very excited about teaching again, which is important. Because in a public school system in some of these neighborhoods, the teachers are pretty burnt out too. So all of a sudden they're like, I as a teacher don't have to have a mindset of scarcity. I could have a mindset of abundance. Scarcity meaning, my school has no money. I can't take my kids on a field trip to a lab to teach them about biology. I have no budget for that. That's scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. Wait, I have a virtual world and I can create whatever I can think of with my students, to an abundance mindset. And so that's where we are with the work we're doing.
Thank you for that story, right? Please, give it up. I was hoping we'd have a little bit of time for questions. We do have to stop on time, but please, how can people reach you and your team if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, what we do now as a nonprofit, if you have a school that you'd like us to work with, I'm pretty good at fundraising. I have corporates and other individuals that, now that we have some real data, the BBC just did an article on the work we're doing too, so we have some good credibility. Mm-hmm. We're working with the UN as well on the global prize we launched. Yeah. If you have a school that you think, hey, I'd like to get this into my school, because we definitely are expanding outside the U.S. now, just mark us at exponentialdestiny.org or Samantha at exponentialdestiny.org, and just reach out to us or talk to us while we're here, and together we'll find a school. Facebook just gave us, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this publicly, but they just gave us 5 pallets, 200 headsets. Uh-huh. If you do the math, 200 times $400, that's
a lot of headsets.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars of headsets. Right. We filled out a whole application. They've donated that to us now.
Fantastic.
So we can walk into a school. We got the headsets. We just need someone. We need someone to fund the team that does the work. I do it pro bono, but the goal is to pay Sam and others who we employ in this field now.
Thank you so much. Will you be outside for a few minutes if people want to reach you there?
Yep.
And thank you once again to Marcus and Samantha from Exponential Destiny. Fantastic. Thank you.